Hello, everybody. My name's Rob Packard. I'm the president of Medical Device Academy. And today we have a special treat. We are actually doing a question and answer interview with a former FDA investigator, Leo LeGros. And Leo, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name there. How do we pronounce your name?
It's actually pronounced Lagrata, but I answered anything but late for dinner.
Okay, could you give us a brief introduction to what your role was at the FDA? Because it's a very large organization and I get the different divisions confused.
Okay, as an FDA investigator, I was a field investigator and I worked directly under one of the 7 centers, Office of Regulatory Affairs, or ORA. The other centers that I dealt with while I was with FDA was the Center for Devices Radiological Health, which covers all medical device products and radiation emitting products such as lasers, UV, and X-ray. CEDAR, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, is responsible for all drugs and research in the drug arena. CBER is the Center for Biologics and Evaluation and Research, and their basic responsibility are vaccines, blood and blood products, as well as tissue and organ. CFSAN, the Center for Food Safety and Nutrition, is responsible for foods, dietary supplements, and cosmetics. The Center for Veterinary Medicine is responsible for all animal feeds, animal drugs, and all veterinary research. And our newest center is the Center for Tobacco Products, which works hand in hand with the Center of Devices and Radiological Health. But under ORA, we are the field investigators. We are responsible for enforcing the regulations that are established by FDA.
Thank you, Leo. On this slide here, I'm giving everybody Leo's contact information. Leo is helping out Medical Device Academy with a few of our clients that need help with mock FDA inspections to prepare for future inspections, and some that are planned or at least expected because they have corrective actions from 483s that they needed to address. He's also been kind enough to help us with writing a blog. And we've got some links down there. One of them is for the FDA recalls blog that he helped with. And then the other one is for a lead auditor course that Leo and I will be teaching this fall in September and October at 7 different cities. One other thing that I wanted to cover just briefly before we go on to our Q&A session is maybe if you can explain, Leo, what is different about the way your job is now as a consultant versus when you would go in and do the same type of inspection, but it wasn't a mock FDA inspection, it was the real thing. How does your role change, and how do you approach things differently now that you're a consultant?
Okay, that's a good question. My goal has always been safe and effective medical devices, foods, and radiation emitting devices, because those are the 3 jurisdictions under FDA that I spent most of my time with. And when I was an investigator, I would go in and I would perform the inspection according to the FDA compliance program, ensuring that the firm had established procedures to meet the regulations and had implemented them correctly and were doing what was necessary to ensure safe and effective products. My consulting, and now since I retired in January, has been to assist firms in becoming compliant. So going in to do an actual QSIT inspection or a mock FDA inspection for one of my clients, I go in on the basis as an FDA investigator, conduct the inspection the same way, but during that time, I can assist by putting in my recommendations for how I feel the firm can best implement the regulations to be compliant.
Thank you very much, Leo. It's really helpful to understand. When you work for the FDA, sometimes people forget that you're not allowed to say some of the things that they say. Well, why didn't you say that? Well, it's because I'm not allowed to. Um, but now that you are working as a consultant, you can share some of that advice and point them in the right directions.
Yeah, exactly right. As an FDA investigator, we were always cautioned, we are not consultants. We cannot tell the firm how to do anything. And if we do, the firm makes those corrective action changes, then they'll come back later and at the next inspection and say, well, Leo told me I could do that. I'm sorry, it's his fault, not ours. And that's what we want to try to avoid as a regulatory personnel, but now as a consultant, I can help the best way I can.
Yeah. We'll go on to the questions now. This first question, you worked in the Tampa, Florida office, and I have some clients in that area, and they mentioned that they have more regular visits than the target of every 2 years. In California, I've heard the same story from several clients there that they see more frequent than biannual visits. They see annual visits. Whereas other regions, I've not heard that. I hear less frequent, even sometimes 3 and 4 years. So can you explain why the Tampa and California areas might be more frequent than the target of 2 years?
Okay. Every product that falls under FDA jurisdiction has its own set of regulations. I'm specifically going to speak to Center for Devices, Radiological Health, Medical Devices, which is our focus here. As most of the industry knows, medical devices fall under 3 classes. Class 1 devices, which are low-risk devices that do not require FDA approval or clearance. Class 2 devices, which are those devices that could be new devices, but on the low to medium risk and need clearance by FDA, especially if the product was manufactured prior to 1976 and is falling under a 510K submission or a 510K clearance by FDA. Then you have the Class 3 devices, which are mostly life-sustaining medical devices that require FDA approval, require clinical studies, and again, under the pre-market program, FDA will approve them as medical devices. And sticking with those devices, you are normally looking at a 2-year routine inspection for all medical devices that fall under that category. But what happens is, if you have a recent inspection and you did not receive an FDA 483, your inspection will be classified NAI or no action indicated. That's where the 2 years will fall in all future scheduling by the work plan administrator to schedule an inspection for the firm. However, if an FDA 483 was issued at the time of an inspection and the observations were mostly minor, the inspection is usually classified VAI or voluntary action indicated. A follow-up inspection to a VAI inspection will be normally on a routine basis, which is 2 years, or if it's a high-risk device, could be the next year. And what a VAI inspection or follow-up inspection will do is to determine the corrective actions taken. Now, in the case of a Class 3 high-risk medical device, if a firm receives a 483 and they receive, or I'm sorry, it could be a Class 2 device or a Class 3 device, if the inspection had a lot of major observations and deficiencies, it could be classified official action indicated or OAI. That's going to require an immediate response by the firm immediate corrective actions within a reasonable amount of time. And then once the firm has indicated that all the corrective actions have been taken, compliance branch of the FDA office, district office, who is responsible for your area, will set an inspection to verify that all the corrective actions were done, and that usually runs on an annual basis. So if you've got a 483 and it was a pretty strong 483, and you are answering the 483 and subsequently you receive a warning letter, once the corrective actions are done, you're looking at a follow-up inspection anytime thereafter. If you don't receive a warning letter, you can be looking at a follow-up inspection within a year after the corrective actions were indicated were completed.
Thank you, Leo. That was fantastic. Um, for our second question, well, it's not yesterday now. When I wrote this, it was yesterday. The presentation about FDA recalls that we had last week. If a manufacturer has a recall, should an inspection automatically be expected the following year? And if not, what other factors impact the likelihood of the inspection?
In the case of where a firm reports a recall to FDA, an immediate inspection is usually not required or not scheduled by the center where you call FDA. Again, there's classifications in the government for everything, and all recalls are classified under 3 classes. Class 1 recalls are those Class 1 recalls where the possibility of injury are very remote, and it's usually on a low-risk device. Class 2 recalls, are Class 2 recalls where there is a potential for either end user or patient injury if the device is improperly used or if it improperly malfunctions, and any corrective actions to the design of that device would require a recall. That could or could not spark an FDA action to take a look to see if the recall was done properly. Class 3, again, on a case-by-case basis, you don't expect to have an inspection follow-up. The requirement is an FDA investigator has been trained to look back and find if the firm has had any recalls since their last inspection. And one of the questions as an FDA investigator I always asked was, have you had any recalls, market withdrawals, or any corrections to any of your medical devices since the last inspection? In that, then I would go back and I would take a look at the adequacy of those recalls. Now, the way the recall works of most of the medical device people that have had a recall, if you report it to FDA and it's been classified by FDA as Class 1, 2, or 3, then effectiveness checks will be ordered by FDA. Investigators will either call or visit firms all the way down to the end user in some cases to determine the effectiveness of the recall. That information goes back to FDA, and they will make a determination as to whether or not they feel that the recall was effective, and then follow up the next inspection.
Thank you a lot. Thank you very much, Leo. For this particular topic, it was a huge help to me to have you write the blog about or help me with the blog for the recalls, and also in the process of doing the research and preparing a webinar on the topic of FDA recalls. It really made me a lot more knowledgeable about the nuances that you don't really see that are occurring at the FDA. So now, I just had a client contact me last week, and they were asking about a potential recall that was going to be occurring, and they didn't know, well, what happens if we report this recall? Is the FDA going to come visit us right away? Are they going to come visit our customer? And these were very important to them, and they sometimes get paralyzed by fear. And I think just knowing the process is a huge help. So I really encourage companies to listen to the webinar on FDA recalls and take a look at that blog, because there's some valuable information in there that really explain the inner workings of how the FDA responds to recalls and how they follow up on effectiveness checks that you may not be aware of, because it's not really covered in the 806 regulations, which most people focus on. A lot of that material's in the in 21 CFR 7, and I think it's specifically 7.30 for the FDA's enforcement of recalls. Now we'll go on to our next question here. What's the most common mistake you notice in companies managing FDA inspections, and how do you rectify it?
Boy, that's a big question. The biggest problem in that most firms make, they fail to grasp the understanding of the quality system regulations, specifically 820, which gives you everything that you really need to know on a short basis as to what you have to have for FDA. There are a lot of guidances as well that are published by each one of the centers that'll give you the present thinking of the center. And let's stick with medical devices. What CDRH is indicating, they'll put out a guidance that'll help the industry to meet the regulation requirements. But the biggest problem I find is that firms don't find the importance of the QSR to be relevant to them, although it is, and FDA is going to require them to implement or establish and implement a quality system, whether or not they feel that quality system is applicable. From tongue depressors and cotton balls down to C1s to implantable defibrillators. It's really important that you follow the quality system. But the area that I've found most trouble with is in the area of specification developers who register with FDA as a specification developer and/or a manufacturer. They get into the business, develop devices, they have their design controls in force, they find somebody to make a prototype, and then they start manufacturing it and then sell it off and maintain the rights to the device. They feel that they're not governed by the quality system. Also, specification developer or manufacturer that is basically a sales division. They don't do any manufacturing at all. They contract every device out to be manufactured for them. They have a hard time grasping in the entire concept of the quality system because they're not involved with the actual operations of the device. They're mostly salespeople. They handle the complaints, they handle the other items, but they really don't get a grasp of it. And that's the biggest problem. They don't grasp the quality system, and in some cases don't really care whether or not they have a quality system in force. The best way to rectify it is after an FDA inspection, taking the corrective actions necessary to the 483 observations they received.
Very much, Leo. For our next question, this is more of a crystal ball kind of question. What direction do you think the FDA enforcement will take over the next 5 years related to quality system inspections? And we had discussed in the past a little bit about the medical device single audited program that is a pilot. But they've had lots of pilots in the past, and I'm curious where you think it's going to go in the future, and maybe your thoughts on harmonization globally.
Well, global harmonization with medical devices has been in effect back into the 1990s, 1993, 95. Kimberly Troutman published a book on global harmonization, and FDA has always wanted to ensure global harmonization of the regulations. So trying to get all medical devices and medical device regulatory agencies hopefully on the same path with the ISO standards and with the FDA regulations. Now, there's still some differences between 13485 and all of the associated performance standards that go along with ISO 13485, as well with the FDA regulations, but they get closer all the time in terms of how FDA looks at enforcement of 820 as it goes with the ISO performance standards. I see it getting much and much closer each year. I came on board with FDA in the early months of 2001, and they were already, they were talking about global harmonization being a matter of life within a year or two. Well, that didn't come to pass, as you well know, and we're still working at it. There's still major meetings being conducted and changes being made, but I think it's going to be, and it has to be, because 70% of the medical devices that come into the United States, or 70% of the medical devices consumed by the United States market, aren't manufactured in the USA. So it's very, very important that to ensure safety and effectiveness in accordance with a global standard is much more efficient than to hold everyone's accountable to one set of regulations, which doesn't make sense.
Let's go on to question 5 here. Due to industry regulatory compliance trends, are FDA investigators receiving specific new training in quality system areas that they didn't receive training for in the past?
I don't really think so. I'm not aware of any really new training, although since I came on board, the method of training has changed through the use of the Office of Regulatory Affairs University, ORAU, the use of computer websites through ORAU, district training, OJT training. There's the systems are still in force, but the training is basically the same. You'll find that instead of always going to a sit-down training class now, FDA investigators are trained through computer training courses, and then we'll go together for one major training session and then go back and complete a series of prerequisite courses on computer and then go back for additional training. This is to keep the costs down, but to keep the impact of the training better, because any new changes can be made right away in the computer programs for those training. I think the training has gotten a lot better since I came on board, but the actual items that are being trained haven't changed that much. The QSIT is still the QSIT, the QSR is still QSR, and those regulations are still the same.
Do you also have exams that you take after those online courses that you take?
Yes, every online course has a question and answer section that must be completed, and a certificate is printed immediately that goes electronically into your training file, and you can print it off to give a copy to your supervisor to prove that you have completed that section.
Yeah, that's
If you are going for, like, once you get through the basics with FDA, then you go into more specialized training into the area that you're going to specialize, which they call the advanced courses. And all of those advanced courses all require prerequisites in terms of experience as well as online training. So there is a requirement for a lot more training that isn't hands-on by FDA, but required hands-on by the investigator to complete before they get certified into any one of a set general program.
That's very similar to my training experience with BSI. For the 3.5 years I was with them, you had your basic training in the beginning for the first 6 months, and then after that, after you'd completed the basic training and you'd been observed for a certain number of audits and written a substantial number of reports, then you were qualified to go out on your own. But you always had monthly refresher trainings, you had special courses as new regulations came on board, and you had exams for them. And they, just like you said, they would print out the certificates right after you passed the exam, and those all went in your training database. Let's go on to the next question here. Question 6. I hear more every year about the eFDA, or electronic FDA. And this is referring to the FDA automating a lot of the administrative tasks that they have to perform. So instead of somebody submitting an MDR form 3500A as a hard copy and then having the FDA transcribe that into the database, instead now there's an electronic submissions gateway. Same thing for eCopy 510K submissions. So do you think the FDA will ever switch over from the green and black bound notebooks that they get from the federal prisons and they write all their handwritten notes into, and switch over to an electronic device, such as a tablet or a notebook? And could it also to include things like photos to help them capture objective evidence?
Yeah, I think so. Since I came on board with FDA, there was a lot of talk about everything going electronically as our computer technology has advanced. We have gone a lot more electronically. Take eSubmitter, where we're putting in all types of annual reports. We're putting in 510K submissions, registration and listing for medical device firms goes through eSubmitter. eSubmitter, which was one of the first electronic submission packages developed by the radiation emitting device section of CDRH for the submission of product reports for laser and UV and X-ray products. This one has expanded, and the eSubmitter has expanded into the registration and listing databases, and I see things going electronic. FDA did a test on a notebook, a very rugged notebook that they used for egg processing inspections. And that was basically, it was a program with a series of questions that had to be answered by the investigator during the inspection to ensure that all areas of the regulation were captured, looked at, and verified whether or not they were adequate. Once the investigator completed that checklist and then put in their comments accordingly, their EIR, or Establishment Inspection Report, was immediately generated by this database through the notebook that they carried. This is how I see eventually it going. As far as the electronic notes, which is what you mentioned is the green and black binders we carry, I don't see that happening immediately, because even if with all the notebooks and Surface computers and notebooks that are available in the marketplace, FDA is 5 to 10 years behind the ability to capture this technology because of our budgets. Therefore, we don't advance as rapidly as industry does in getting the newest toys in the marketplace. Will it happen? Absolutely. Will it happen in the next 5 years? Possibly.
Yeah, that's a good timeline. I always wonder why they're 10 years behind, but it seems to come back to budget, even though it's a cost-saving measure to automate a lot of these tasks.
Well, you got to remember, not only do they have to purchase the electronic devices for the field, then they also have to have the same type of product for the center, the district office that's responsible, and it goes all the way back up and down the chain. Everybody has to have access. Everyone in the centers will drive what ORA does in the field. Every center submits to the Office of Regulatory Affairs how many inspections of each one of their area of responsibility they require to have done by the regulations, by congressional mandates, or whatever programs that they are running with. And then ORA's responsibility is to go out there and do it. But if they can't capture the data electronically, it doesn't do any good to have all the electronic data in the field if it can't be analyzed and captured by the people that need to file the reports on it. So it has to go, there has to be enough money to supply those products to everyone.
Okay, let's go on to question number 7 here. This is sort of a continuation of the other question that dealt a little bit with harmonization. The Medical Device Single Audit Program, MDSAP, pilot started earlier this year, and acceptance of MDSAP reports in lieu of the ANVISA audits by Brazilian regulators in Health Canada and Australia and the US FDA is exciting. Do you think that MDSAP will dramatically reduce the number of accused inspections?
I've got to go back and again, under the regulations, it is a requirement for each one of the centers to ensure the safety and effectiveness of the products under their area of jurisdiction. But if you logically think about it, 90% of the food that is consumed by U.S. citizens is not grown in the United States. Medical devices, as I stated before, is about 70%. Radiation emitting devices about 90%. And these are the ones that I have immediate recall on because those are the areas that I dealt with. It's impossible for the 1,000+ investigators that do the inspections to be able to complete inspections of all global processors of food, medical devices, and so on, and ensure their safety and effectiveness. The FDA cannot do it alone. They have to rely on the established regulation of the countries where the manufacturers around the globe are established in manufacturing devices for export. It has to happen. There are different programs that have been tried. We had the Associated Persons Program, which was established with the use of ISO certified auditors, also being not trained but oversaw, audited by FDA, and became a part of the Associated Persons Program or approved FDA certified auditors that could do an ISO inspection and have it be used as an FDA inspection. However, it fell upon the firm to request that the most recent ISO inspection or notified body inspection could be used as their next regularly scheduled routine FDA inspection. A firm that was under a warning letter or under a VAI situation that had some deficiencies previously noticed could not even apply for the program. So it didn't go anywhere. Firms, as you know and stated before, don't want to contact FDA, they don't want to call them for recall, they don't want to file MDRs because they're afraid if they put in an MDR in on a possible adverse event on a medical device, that FDA is going to come down on them. That's not always the case, as you are well aware, that the actualities are, unless it's something that is really life-threatening, FDA cannot immediately come back and require an immediate inspection. But I do see the entire industry changing, where FDA is going to accept other countries' regulations and their inspections as part of ours. I don't see any way around it.
I'm looking forward to seeing the day we have one regulation across the world and everybody using electronics, and also having each country doing its own inspections but having them apply to the whole world. But I think 5 years is probably even a little optimistic for that vision. But companies are slowly getting the message that they're much better off reporting things than letting the FDA find it. Let's go on to our next question here, number 8. You perform... Actually, I think I already asked this question.
Yeah, we actually talked about this in the beginning.
Yep. So I jumped ahead, I guess, and we covered number 8 earlier, where we were asking how do you help out the most when you talk with clients during your simulated QSID inspections. So we'll go on to question 9 here. Many companies seem to use a memo to respond to FDA 43s, but what do you recommend to clients with regard to format and content of an FDA 43 response?
That's a good question. The FDA has always involuntarily required a medical device firm and all of the firms under FDA jurisdiction to file a written response to FDA, to the district office, addressed to the district director, within 15 business days, not calendar days, but business days. So that basically gives you 3 weeks to start taking corrective actions and to show FDA that you agree with the observations that the investigator came up with, or gives you the opportunity to dispute some of those observations. It became mandatory around 2 years ago. So it was involuntary, but then it became mandatory that all FDA inspected companies had to file a written response to the 43 within 15 business days, directed to the district office that they reside. Once the compliance officer at the district office receives this response through the district director, they will review it for content and for adequacy. They will also, through the database, provide the investigator who conducted the inspection an opportunity to review the responses and to indicate in the database as to its adequacy. Now, this response is 5 questions. I'm sorry, it's 1 question with 5 possible answers, and you click one of them. The most frequently used was either that the response appears adequate to look at it at the next inspection, or the responses appear inadequate and to follow up. And follow-up can be just a follow-up with a letter by the compliance branch indicating what other steps have been taken since the response was made. The comment, as I said, was a general comment as to the adequacy of it. But to file the response, the best way to do it is to file a letter, a cover letter indicating what your plans are, as an overview to what your plans are to correct the items you were correcting. And then each observation should be explained, what investigation you conducted, the recommended corrective actions, and if the corrective actions were completed, to provide all exhibits that of the corrective action, including the training of trainable procedures that require training, the adequacy of the training, and the effectiveness of the corrective action. I've seen many OAI inspections that were recommended for a warning letter have the warning letter set aside until the next inspection based on the response of the firm. So it's very, very, very important to look at the response to the 483 as a very important item for your industry and not just a requirement or another regulation that they have to deal with.
Part of my question that I was focusing on has to do with a blog that I also recently wrote on how to respond to 483s. And I've asked quite a few different FDA inspectors this same question, and a few of them have said, um, you know, it doesn't really matter whether you submit a memo or you use your I'm sorry, use your CAPA forms and then have a cover letter on it. Whereas others have said, no, 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 you absolutely should use your own CAPA forms. It's important to use your CAPA system, and we would actually prefer that you didn't use a memo. And the way I look at it is when a company writes a memo instead of using their CAPA forms for responding to 483s, they're really doing double the work here. They enter everything into their CAPA system, and then they copy and paste this over to a memo and give it to the FDA, but it isn't the same as what the FDA is reviewing when they come back to close the 483s. And I would think it would be important to show them the same kind of information in the same format using their CAPA system. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely correct, because the CAPA is broken up in different segments. It's looking into the investigation that was conducted, what the final determination for the corrective action should be, what the actual corrective action was, and then at the end of the CAPA you have, if the response includes the effectiveness of the corrective action, you have the last section where quality assurance is determining the effectiveness of the corrective action to the CAPA. No, I recommend that all the forms that are generated in response to a corrective action be submitted at the time the response is done. But if the corrective action isn't completed, a complete indication as to what the firm plans to do should be indicated. If you just say we're going to correct it, and we're going to correct it 90 days, and not provide any other explanation at all, the reviewer can't indicate the adequacy of your response. Without being able to conduct or determine the adequacy of your response, and then once you well, let me drop back once. If you say that you can't get it done for 90 days. It's a pretty important item that's going to take in design and so forth. You're going to need validation and so forth. It's going to take 90 days for the corrective action to be completed. At the end of the 90 days, submit to FDA all of that corrective action and the finalization of that CAPA to show that you completed it within the time frames that you specified. So constant contact through the efforts after the 483 initial response is also very important.
I I think a lot of firms, when they first get that 483 letter and they send in the response, sometimes their response is inadequate just because they didn't put enough detail about what their actual plans were. And I think your suggestion of going back and giving them a follow-up saying we've completed the corrective actions and here's the objective evidence is fantastic. And they need to realize that if they do that quickly enough, if they implement their CAPAs quickly and they send back that information, they may be beating out a warning letter that's coming their way that they're not even aware of. And the quality of the initial response and the quality of the follow-up is a key way to avoid getting those warning letters from the FDA when the inspector found something. And most firms don't realize that that's within their capabilities to head off a warning letter at the pass.
No, I definitely agree with you. Um, in one of at my exit interview with a firm after I issued the 483, that's one of the things that I always told them. The better the response and the better that you show that you're willing to take the corrective action and or have actually taken immediate corrective actions within those 15 business days and can show it on paper and provide that to the district office is the best thing that you can do to forestall a warning letter.
We're going to go on to question number 10. You and I have both been helping foreign firms with responding to warning letters with automatic detention. For anybody that doesn't know what an automatic detention is, could you please explain it? And also, could you please explain how the reaction to an FDA 483 and warning letter should be different if the manufacturer is a foreign firm?
Okay. The one thing the foreign medical device manufacturers that are shipping product to the United States should understand is that's the only area where there is a definite, the FDA has some teeth. If an inspection of a foreign manufacturer is conducted and a 483 is issued that has some serious observations to the safety and effectiveness of the device, the FDA will then request that that product be placed on automatic detention. And what happens is the imports branch of the FDA, which is separate from the domestics branch of FDA for all domestic manufacturers, will then have what's called an import alert. That import alert places that company and the devices that they manufacture on hold, that if they're placed on automatic detention, no devices that they manufacture can be imported into the United States. They will be held at the border, and if not claimed or shipped back to the manufacturer, can be destroyed. To respond to a 43, it's very, very important for the manufacturer to show the FDA that the corrective actions are being completed in a timely manner and effectively. But the getting off of the import alert or an automatic detention isn't automatic. Another inspection has to be performed by FDA before that's going to happen. So if you find yourself with a warning letter and your products are on import alert, you're not going to be able to ship anything to the United States. And taking the corrective action alone isn't sufficient to ship your product back to the U.S. You must get another inspection. It has to be NAI or VAI with no major violations. FDA is going to review it, and then they are going to decide whether or not to take the firm off of import alert. So you're looking, if you are put on import alert or automatic detention, you're looking at a minimum of a year before it'll even be considered by FDA to remove you from the automatic detention list.
I think that's really valuable for the foreign firms to realize. Another thing that I kept on trying to make clear to one of the firms I work with is that you not only need to, if this situation occurred where you were put on import alert and you weren't able to import product into the United States, not only do you have to respond with a corrective action plan to the FDA, but they won't even review your plan until you've provided corrective action evidence that you've actually implemented the corrective actions. And then and only then, if it's adequate, will they schedule an inspection and put it on the workload. So that's why it's at least a year out and probably closer to 18 months by the time you've implemented your corrective actions, provided evidence, they've reviewed it, and put you on the workload list to go inspect. And that's a long time to wait with no sales all during that period.
No, that's exactly right. And that's why it's really important for a foreign firm receiving a 483 to respond adequately in the best possible format that they can. One, so that they don't get on automatic detention. And just because they receive a warning letter doesn't always indicate that the firm is going to be on automatic detention, but in most cases, they will be.
Okay, that concludes our Q&A session, Leo. Thank you very much. For those of you that are interested in taking the lead auditor course that Leo and I will be training people on for this fall, it's going to be in 7 different cities, Tampa, close to Leo, and 6 other cities. We've tried to locate these into some of the markets where we have a lot of medical device companies. But if you're interested in registering for the course, you can go to this website. We'd be very interested in seeing you. And what makes this course a little bit different from your other lead auditor courses is the emphasis on FDA inspection readiness and 21 CFR 820. We will cover ISO 1345, and it will meet your requirements for internal auditing for your ISO certification. But the emphasis here is to make sure you're also ready for the FDA inspections, to avoid those 43s, or if you do have them, make sure you know how to respond. And also, as Leo had indicated in this training, one of the biggest gaps we see is companies really don't have adequate training or knowledge and understanding of 21 CFR 820. If you need help with regulatory compliance, whether it's responding to a 43 or something else, give me a call, or if you have further questions, you also received Leo's contact information, so you can shoot an email over to him if you have specific questions. And if you can't reach me, please contact Glenn Melvin. He's our Director of Business Development. Here's his contact information as well. Thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.